Hi, this is RETEACH video number 1 on dividing multi-digit numbers. Now this video lesson is going to go along with that test 1 on dividing multi-digit numbers that you do need to take and pass before you can move on to test 2. What I would like for you to do is go to the next available page in your composition notebook, and I would like for you to title it exactly the way that you see it on this piece of paper. In order for you to be able to retake that, the test 1 on multi-digit numbers, dividing multi-digit numbers, you'll need to show me your notes and work out examples for this. So the first example that I want you to write down on your paper is 2,950 divided by 50. What I would like for you to do is pause the video and try to work this problem out. Now, when you've worked it out as far as you can go ahead and push play to check your work. Now, just to let you know, this problem does end evenly, which means that there's no remainders at all if you do the problem correctly. Okay. So on this problem here, we have 2,950 divided by 50. So what you're going to have to do is do something I call a guesstimation. That's a made-up word. So you're kind of guessing, but you're also sort of estimating, because it's really hard to figure out how many times 50 goes into like large numbers such as this. But 50 is kind of an easy one because we can kind of skip count by it. So we know that 50 does not go into 2, so I'm putting a little x right there. And we know 50 does not go into 29. But I know that I can get 50 to go into 295. So in my head, I'm going to skip count by 50s. 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300 would be too high. So what I ended up getting was 5. So 50 times 5, I'm going to want to do that off to the side. And I know that's not a bad one to do in your head, but let's not trust our heads yet. And we get 250. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract this amount just like I would with normal division, because this is a normal division problem, and I get 45. Then I'm going to go ahead and drop down my 0. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to start thinking about, well, how many times does 50 go into 450? So thinking about it, 9. 9 times 50 does give me 450. When I subtract, I get 0. Now, this is an example of a terminating number, or one that ends. You have the final answer of 59, and you do not have anything left over. So now I'm going to show you something that has most of the same numbers on it, but we're going to end up having a leftover amount. So what I would like for you to do is, next to this problem, we're going to go ahead and rewrite the problem, but we're going to change it up a little bit. So our dividend this time is going to be 2,954 divided by 50, because I want to show you how this is going to change. So go ahead and write that down. What I would like for you guys to do is you can go ahead and pause the video and work this out as best as you can. Now, when you get to the leftover amount, do not tell me that you have a remainder 4 left over. What I want you to do instead is add a decimal and a 0 or 2 until you get this to finish or terminate. Okay, so starting with this problem again, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and divide it out the way we did before. So we already know that 50 doesn't go into 2 or 9, but we know that it goes into 295 5 times. We're going to get a 250 here. Subtract, I get 45, and I'm bringing down a 5. I'm sorry, not a 5, but a 4 this time. So now I start over again. 50 goes into 454 9 times. So I put a 9 here. 9 times 50 is going to give me 450. Now watch what happens here. When we subtract, we get a 4 left over. I don't want to write R4 for remainder 4 because we can't do that anymore, especially since we're really going to start dealing with decimals now. So this is a very easy fix. What we're going to do is we're going to add a decimal to our dividend, and then we're going to add a decimal. We're going to slide it straight up, and we're going to add it to our quotient. Now you are going to have to continue your line, your quotient line a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and do that because we're going to basically keep going on this problem. So here's my decimal here and my decimal here, and we're adding a 0. So I like to start with 1 0. So now that we added a 0 to our problem, it did not change the value of this problem at all. We just added a 0 after a decimal point so we can finish this. So we're going to drop down that 0 to my 40, or to my 4, which created a 40. And now we start dividing all over again. 50 goes into 40 how many times? Well, thinking about it, it doesn't. It goes into it 0 times. So up in my quotient, I'm going to write a 0. I'm still not done with this problem because I'm still stuck with a number down at the bottom right over here. I got to get rid of that. It has to turn into a 0. So that means I'm going to add one more 0 to my quotient, to my dividend, excuse me, and I'm going to drop down that other 0. Now I have the number 400 down here. So I think to myself, 50 goes into 400 how many times? 8 times. 8 times 50 gives me 400. I subtract and I get a 0. So now your final answer on this problem ends up being 59 and 800ths. And the way we got the 800ths is by adding those 2 zeros in the dividend, which is these 2 zeros right over here. And this is how you're going to have to do your division problems basically from here on out. All right, let's go ahead and do another problem. On this one we have 4,273 divided by 12. Now you'll notice here that I'm not putting commas like in my dividend or within my problem because sometimes they could be mistaken as decimals, especially if you don't write them clearly. So I just strictly write exactly what you see here. So what I want you guys to do is please pause the video and give this problem a try. Now you're going to notice that you're going to end up having to add several zeros. What I want you to do is when you add your decimal and your 0 and you keep going to try to get this to end, I do not want you to add any more than 3 additional zeros. And if that doesn't make sense to you, go ahead and work the problem out as far as you think you can go. Do it, but don't keep adding zeros because it won't end for a while. All right, so looking at this problem, I want to think to myself, well, how many times does 12 go into 42? Well, or 4. It doesn't go into 4, so I'm putting a little X there, but it does go into 42 3 times. 3 times 12 is going to give me a 36. When I subtract 42 minus 36, I get 6. So now I'm going to drop down my next number, which is a 7. And I ask myself, well, how many times does 12 go into 67? Well, I know 12 times 5 gives me 60, so that's got to be right. So 12 times 5 gives me 60. I'm going to subtract, and I get a 7. The next number I need to bring down is that 3. So now I ask myself, well, how many times does 12 go into 3? Well, I know that 12 times 6 gives me 72, so that's going to be the closest one that I'm going to get. So 12 times 6 gives me 72. I'm going to subtract and I get a 1. Okay, now if you notice here in your problem, we are out of numbers. There's nothing else to drop down. So this is where you're actually going to add a decimal point and at least 1 0. And I like to add just 1 0 at a time because sometimes you don't have to add many. So I added a decimal and a 0, and I'm adding my decimal point up here in my quotient. Now I'm going to drop down that 0 down to the bottom of my problem, and I get a 0 here. So now I have the number 10 at the bottom. How many times does 12 go into 10? It doesn't. It goes into it 0 times. So I write a 0 up here. Now I need to add another 0 in my dividend. Bring it down. Now I get the number 100. So I ask myself, well, how many times does 12 go into 100? And I think to myself, it goes into it approximately 8 times. So 8 times 12 is going to give me 96. I'm going to subtract. I get 4. So I'm still not done. So I'm going to add another 0. I'm going to bring that 0 straight down. Now I get 40. 12 goes into 40 about how many times? Well, I know 12 times 3 is going to give me 36. So I'm going to write a 3 here. 36 goes here. Subtract. I get a 4. So now it still hasn't ended. So now I could add another 0, bring that guy straight down. 12 goes into 40. How many times? It goes into it 3 times. 3 times 12 gives you 36. Now, if I were to subtract again, which I will, I end up getting a 4, and I know I'm running out of space on my screen here. So what we end up having here is something that we call a repeating decimal. It means it goes on forever and ever and ever. Now, the way that you would write the answer for a repeating decimal would be, you would write all the digits that show up just once. So we have a 3, a 5, a 6, a decimal point, a 0, an 8. Now the 3 is the number that goes on forever. So you would write the 3 just once, and then you would put a repeating bar above only the number 3, because that's the number that's going to go on forever and ever and ever. Now, here's the deal. And I know, sorry about that. I know there's been a lot of confusion with people with how to express their answers, because on your quiz or on your test, it tells you if necessary, round to the nearest hundredth. You guys, the hundredth spot is this spot right here. It's 2 decimal spots after the decimal, or 2 spots after the decimal point. Remember, this is our tenths, this is our hundredths. So if it's wanting you to round to the nearest hundredth, that means it does not want any other numbers or digits that come after that hundredth spot. So that means I want my number to end right here, just to be what I have inside the box. But you can't just ignore what's on the outside. You have to think about the rounding rules. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. Well, since it's a 3, and that's the 3, it's knocking on my back door, it's not 5 or more, that means I let it rest. I don't need that 3, so I could just drop it off. So your final answer for this problem ends up being 356 and 8/100ths. All right, so we're going to work through one more problem. I would really like for you guys to pause the video once you copy this problem down and work it all the way through. I'm not going to do as much talking when I show you guys the answer, but I will talk you through some of the problem. All right, pause now and let's see where you get. Now, if necessary, that means if you need to, round it to the nearest hundredth. All right, so let's go ahead and check your answer. The correct answer to this is 78 and 875 thousandths. Now this problem ended up ending, which means that I finally got a 0 at the bottom. However, I did mention that, I believe I mentioned it. If I didn't, sometimes the directions are going to ask you to round it to the nearest hundredth. Now the hundredth spot, you guys, is what's in this box right here. That's where the hundredths would end. It ends at the 7 that's right after the 8. Not the first 7, but the second 7, which means that I have to pay attention to that leftover number, which is the 5, and that's what's knocking on my back door, and think 5 or more, raise a score. 4 or less, let it rest. Well, since it's 5 or more, the 7, which is the number right in front of it, would have to be raised up just one more digit, which means that this answer would end up turning into 78 and 88/100ths. Okay, if you're not sure how I got this problem, it is really important for you guys. Oh, let me get that right. It is important for you guys to be able to look at steps that are done for you and to be able to figure out where you went wrong. Now you'll notice over here on the right side of the screen, and I'll put a box around it, I did a lot of multiplication on the side. That was my guessing part, guessing and checking, my guesstimation, because I don't know how many times 64 goes into 5048, and I did not use a calculator to solve this, so it's very possible you guys might find an error, but so I did do the work off to the side. So you can see it does require a lot of room and a lot of space, but it's super important that you do this neatly and that you're patient and you just do one step at a time, because the steps do just keep repeating themselves. Okay, so you guys, that's it for this video. I know it took a little bit time, but I'm hoping that it helped you as far as understanding adding zeros, or annexing zeros is how we call them, ANNEX, to annex a 0, and how to round it to the nearest hundredth when the directions ask you to. All right, that's it for now. Be sure to show me these video notes so I know that you took them and completed them prior to you guys doing your future quizzes on dividing by multi-digit numbers.